Hi, this is Jay from paulpolito.com, and welcome to the next installment of our Linux screencast series about GNU and Unix commands. 103.1 Work on the Command Line, Part 1. In this video, you will get to know the command line interface, bash, and how to modify shell environment variables. The following terms will be part of this screencast: shell, bash, shell environment, env, echo, export, set, unset. The shell. Although Linux nowadays does include excellent options for a graphical user interface, also called GUI, over 90% of the LPI101 exams focus on the command line interface, short CLI. The command line interface is a text interface for typed commands. This command line interface is called shell. A shell is the interface between user and the operating system. The default command line shell, and the only shell which the LPI101 exam preparation demands you to know, is bash. Bash is an acronym for Born Again Shell. The bash shell environment. The default shell for every user is based on the entry in the system authentication database. When implemented locally, that authentication database starts with the file /etc password. Let's have a look at this file. The last entry, separated by colons, shows for user Paul /bin bash, which means that the standard shell for user Paul is the bash. In other words, when Paul logs on to the system from a command line interpreter, he would receive the bash shell as command line interpreter after login. There are a few settings associated with the shell. These settings are called shell environment and are configured through system-wide and user-specific configuration files. One of the system-wide configuration files is /etc profile. The commands in /etc profile are executed whenever a new login shell is started. Generally, /etc profile calls further system-wide configuration files like /etc bash.bashrc, or in this case, /etc bashrc. These system-wide configuration files are only called when a user logs into the system, and actually, before the user gets a CLI, user-specific bash configuration files are invoked. These files are so-called hidden files, which are located in the user's home directory. They are called hidden files because the file names begin with a dot, for example, .bashrc, and are therefore not visible with a simple ls command. To make these files visible, use the ls-la command. When a user switches from one shell to another shell, the files .bashrc and .bash profile, if they exist in that user's home directory, are executed. When a user logs out of the system, the commands in the .bash logout files are run. To configure the bash shell environment to fit their needs, several programs are available. We will discuss these commands now. The bash command. As you already know, bash is a command line interpreter that executes commands read from the standard input or from a file. Bash also is a command on its own that invokes another instance of the bash shell. It is also run whenever a user logs into the Linux system. The env and echo commands. Every process includes so-called environment variables. These variables are parameters like a username, the path to the user's home directory, and the user's standard shell, for example. Env is used to either print a list of all environment variables or to run another utility in an altered environment without having to modify the currently existing environment. Here you see an output of the current environment variables. Note that the variables are typically capitalized. Now I'll explain some of these environment variables in the next table. As environment settings are variables, they can be reviewed by using the echo command. To check the value of the current home directory, we have to give the command echo $home To find the current path variable, we would have to give the command echo $path. Export, set, and unset. To add a new environment variable to the list of current variables, we can use the export or set commands. Here's an example. We will add a variable Paul with the value Polito. The echo command now delivers the value Polito. But if we start a new bash now with the bash command and then give the echo command, we see that the variable Paul isn't present in the new shell. The echo $Paul command therefore does not give us any value. Let's exit this shell and go back to the other shell. Now, let's use the export command to export the variable to all other shells which are started from within this shell. So type now, export Paul. Now open a shell with the bash command and then check if the variable has a value. As you see, the variable indeed was exported to the other shell. It varies by shell, but basically the set command is also used to define a variable, but only for the current shell. The export command is used to define the variable as one that subshells, these are shells spawned from the original shell, should inherit. To unset our new variable, we use the unset command. For the Paul variable, the following command would unassign the previous value of that variable. Just type unset Paul. Summary. The Linux command line interface is called shell. A shell is the interface between user and the operating system. There are a few settings associated with the shell. These settings are called shell environment and are configured through system-wide and user-specific configuration files like /etc profile and .bashrc in the user's home directory. The bash is a command line interpreter that executes commands read from the standard input or from a file. Bash also is a command on its own that invokes another instance of the bash shell. The command env is used to either print a list of all environment variables or to run another utility in an altered environment without having to modify the currently existing environment. Environmental settings are variables and can be reviewed by using the echo command. To add a new environment variable to the list of current variables, we can use the export or set commands. To unset a variable, we use the unset command. Study points. Play around with some variables. Export, set, and unset them by using the appropriate programs. Study the output of the env command. Familiarize yourself with the echo command. Find out what built-in shell commands are. This is Jay from paulpolito.com, and thanks for watching this screencast about GNU and Unix commands. Until next time.